The Dragon in Chains. The court of King Valor glittered with gold and cruelty. Light poured from high-arched windows of stained crystal, shattering into jeweled fragments across the vast marble hall. Each shard of color painted the polished floor in hues of ruby and sapphire, disguising the thin fractures that spidered outward from the chamber's center. Golden chandeliers hung like captive suns from a ceiling frescoed with scenes of triumphant knights driving spears into the hearts of winged beasts. Every painted dragon writhed in agony beneath heroic human blades. The message was clear. This was a kingdom that conquered. Beneath banners stitched in crimson and silver, house sigils embroidered with lions, towers, and swords, the nobles of the realm reclined in velvet-draped tiers. Rings flashed on jeweled fingers as goblets were lifted. Silk rustled. Perfume mingled with the faint scent of hot iron. They leaned forward, eager for spectacle. At the center of the marble hall, bound in black iron etched with runes that pulsed an unnatural blue, knelt the creature they had come to see. They called him a dragon. He did not look like the winged terrors painted overhead. There were no vast pinions tearing at the ceiling, no towering bulk blotting out the light. He wore the shape of a boy, thin, barefoot, dark-haired, dust clung to his skin. His ribs showed faintly beneath the torn fabric of a simple tunic, dark lashes rested against hollowed cheeks. But when he breathed, smoke curled from his lips. Not thick enough to choke, not wild enough to ignite. Just a whisper of what lay beneath. Faint lines of scaled silver traced the delicate bones of his collarbones and disappeared beneath cloth. They caught the refracted sunlight and gleamed like buried treasure. His wrists were circled by iron manacles carved with ancient sigils designed to suppress power older than the kingdom itself. Every few heartbeats, the runes flickered, as though struggling to contain something too vast for their geometry. His name was Aaron, though no one in the court cared to use it. "The beast refuses to yield," announced Lord Malrek, stepping into the circle of light. He wore black trimmed with silver thread, a mockery of priestly austerity. His boots clicked sharply against marble as he paced around the kneeling figure. In one gloved hand he carried a whip, long, barbed, and woven with spell thread that shimmered faintly along its length. Tiny etched glyphs lined each leather strand, meant to carry pain deeper than flesh. "It has not spoken in 3 days," Malrek continued, voice smooth as polished steel. "No plea, no admission, no acknowledgement of our sovereign's mercy." A ripple of amusement stirred through the nobles. 3 days without speech. 3 days without food save a cup of water. 3 days kneeling beneath runes designed to press down upon the soul. Aaron did not lift his head, but his fingers bound behind him twitched. He could hear them. Every whisper, every delighted murmurs, every word spoken about him as though he were livestock rather than living. "Strike until it submits," someone called lazily from the upper tier. Malrek inclined his head toward the throne where King Valor sat, draped in furs and crimson velvet. The king's face was unreadable, but his fingers drummed once against the armrest in silent permission. The whip cracked. The sound split the air like lightning tearing cloth. It struck across Aaron's back, biting through fabric and skin alike. The spell thread ignited upon impact, and the runes in the iron chains flared violently blue as magic surged against them. Aaron's shoulders jerked. Smoke spilled from between his clenched teeth. The marble beneath his knees fractured with a sharp report, thin lines racing outward from where his restrained power pressed downward in reflexive defense. A collective intake of breath swept the court. Still, he did not cry out. He would not give them that. Again the whip struck. This time it wrapped partially around his side, barbs tearing as Malrek yanked it free. The glyphs along the leather flared white-hot, carrying agony far deeper than surface wounds. It was not simply pain of the flesh, it was pain that vibrated along bone, along nerve, along something older. Aaron's back trembled. Beneath his skin, something vast and ancient pressed outward. Scales threatened to bloom fully across his shoulders. Fire gathered in the hollow of his chest, a coiling inferno begging release. His spine ached with the urge to lengthen, to arch, to burst from fragile human constraints into the immense truth of himself. He could feel the ceiling above him. He could feel how easily it would shatter. He could feel how quickly flame would run along the silk banners and melt gold into rivers. He could feel the terror that would bloom in this hall like a long-denied flower. And he forced it down. He swallowed flame. He swallowed instinct. He swallowed centuries of inherited rage. He had promised. High above, behind a latticework balcony reserved for servants and lesser observers, a single human man watched. He did not sit among nobles. He did not wear silk. His cloak was plain wool, travel-worn and dusted with road grit. His boots were scuffed leather. His hands, gripping the iron railing, were calloused and scarred from axes and plow handles rather than swords. To the nobles below, he was no one. Just another peasant drawn by curiosity. But to Aaron, even without lifting his gaze, he was a steady presence, a heartbeat across distance. The whip cracked a third time. It tore open skin already laced with red. The impact drove Aaron forward, palms striking marble. Smoke burst from his mouth in a sharp exhale. The chains screamed as their runes flared brighter, reacting to the surge of power that threatened to escape. And the dragon shook. Not in fear, in restraint. His entire body trembled with the effort of containment. Muscles locked, teeth ground together hard enough that one cracked slightly at the edge. The silver tracing his collarbones brightened, spreading faintly down his arms like frost blooming across glass. In the painted ceiling above, heroic knights smiled eternally in triumph. Below them, the reality knelt in chains and refused to become the monster they expected. Malric circled again, irritation creeping into his expression. "See how it quivers," he announced. "A beast pretending at civility, it will break." Aaron's golden eyes flickered upward at that. Not at Malric. Not at the king. Upward, toward the balcony. For just a heartbeat, his gaze found the human man watching. And the trembling lessened. The smoke thinned. The fire inside him coiled tighter, no longer lashing outward in fury, but compressing inward like a star refusing collapse. The nobles noticed the glance. They followed it upward. They saw only a commoner gripping iron too tightly. "Remove that peasant," one lord scoffed. But King Valor lifted a hand faintly, staying the guards. His gaze narrowed, thoughtful. Below, Malric raised the whip again, impatience overtaking performance. "This will teach obedience." The lash descended. And as it did, something deeper than pain flared in Aaron's chest. It's memory, not of fire, of a cabin at forest's edge, of rough wooden beams and smoke curling harmlessly from a chimney, of a steady voice saying, "Easy now." The whip struck. Pain bloomed. But instead of roaring, Aaron breathed in. And held. The marble cracked further beneath him, fractures widening into jagged veins across the once pristine floor. Gasps rippled through the hall, not at his suffering but at the damage. At what it implied. The runes on the chains flickered erratically now. They had been forged to bind fury. They had not been forged to bind love. Above, the human man's jaw tightened. His eyes, weathered and lined by years of sun and wind, did not waver. He did not shout. He did not beg. But something in his stillness changed. Below, the dragon continued to kneel. He shook. He bled. He endured. Because the whip could cut flesh. The chains could press against power. The court could laugh. But none of them understood the most dangerous truth in the room. The dragon was not silent because he was broken. He was silent because someone had once taught him that strength was not measured by how loudly one could roar, but by how much destruction one could choose not to unleash. And that lesson, forged not in fire but in the quiet patience of a human father, held firmer than any rune-etched iron. The whip rose again. The air grew heavier. The fractures in the marble deepened with a sharp, echoing crack. And every noble in that glittering hall leaned forward, waiting to see if the beast would finally become what they needed him to be. But the dragon only lowered his head once more. And endured. The human father. They had found Aaron in ash. Not the soft gray remnants of a hearth fire gone cold, but the choking, bitter ruin of a forest raised in the name of sport and sovereignty. Royal hunters had ridden beneath green canopies at dawn, horns sounding bright and arrogant. By dusk, the trees were blackened skeletons clawing at a smoke-choked sky. The dragon had come when the fire spread too far. It had been old, ancient by human reckoning. Vast wings had beaten smoke into storms. Flame had met flame in a desperate attempt to carve a boundary between inferno and life. But hunters carried more than spears. They carried ballistae tipped with alchemical iron and bolts soaked in venom brewed for creatures of legend. By morning, the forest was silent. And in the heart of the devastation, among trees reduced to charcoal pillars, soldiers found a small shape curled against a corpse the size of a cottage. A true dragon lay sprawled in death, scales dulled to tarnished bronze, one wing torn beyond repair. Its great head rested upon the earth as though sleeping. Its eyes, clouded now, faced the sky. Against its cooling flank was a child. He was half-burned, soot-streaked, his dark hair singed at the edges. His bare back was blistered in places where embers had fallen. Thin arms were wrapped tightly around the dragon's foreclaw, fingers dug into the creases between scales as though he believed he could hold the immense body together by sheer will. He did not cry. He did not speak. But when a soldier stepped forward and nudged the dragon's limb with his boot, the child's head snapped up. His eyes were molten gold. Smoke licked from between his teeth. The soldiers staggered back, swearing. Another one whispered hoarsely, a whelp. Kill it, said another quickly, before it grows. Steel rasped from scabbards. The child bared small, broken teeth, not in threat, but in something like grief twisted into warning. The air around him shimmered faintly with heat despite the rain beginning to fall. They would have killed him. Most kingdoms would have called it mercy. But fate, as it often did, chose an unlikely interruption. A cart creaked along the edge of the ruined forest road. Its wheels groaned under the weight of timber salvaged from less scorched groves. A single mule plodded patiently at the reins. The driver drew the animal to a halt when he saw the soldiers' formation. He was not impressive. Broad-shouldered from labor rather than war, yes, but plainly dressed. His beard was threaded with early gray, his tunic was patched at one elbow, his hands were roughened from axe hafts and plow handles. He stepped down from the cart slowly, eyes taking in the devastation before settling on the child and the dragon's corpse. There was no awe in his gaze. No hungers. No fear. Only quiet assessment. What have you there? He asked. A pest, one soldier muttered, dragon spawn. The man walked closer. He saw the blisters. The soot-caked lashes. The way the small hands refused to let go of the dead dragon's claw. He saw how the child's body shielded that claw, as though protecting even in loss. Steel rose again. Stand aside, barked the captain. It will burn before noon if we leave it. The woodsman stepped between the ring of soldiers and the child. He did not draw weapons. He did not raise his voice. He simply placed himself there. If you fear a child, he said evenly, perhaps the beast is not him. Something in the tone unsettled them. It was not defiance. It was not accusation. It was certainty. The captain frowned. You would take responsibility for it. The woodsman glanced back at the boy. The golden eyes watched him, not with trust, not yet, but not with hatred either. There was something rower there. Alone? Yes, the man said. And if it kills you, then I suppose you can burn my cabin too. A tense silence lingered. The rain strengthened, hissing against embers. Steam rose from dragon scales. Finally, the captain spat into the mud. Take it, he said. If it so much as singes a field, we will know who to hang. The woodsman nodded once. He approached the child slowly, hands visible. You can't stay here, he said quietly. He's gone. The boy's grip tightened. The woodsman crouched, ignoring the way heat licked faintly at his skin. I won't hurt you, he added, but I won't leave you either. A long moment passed. Then stiffly, the child released the dragon's claw. When the woodsman lifted him, he was startlingly light. That was how Tomas Gray became a father. The cabin at the forest's edge had never known such fire. At first, it came in accidents. A startled gasp that sent sparks across the thatch roof. A nightmare that scorched the blankets black. A sob that made the hearth flare dangerously high. Tomas did not shout. He did not strike. He patched the roof, he doused the sparks, he replaced what burned. He learned quickly to stack stones around the hearth higher than before. He cleared brush farther from the cabin walls. He dug a shallow trench encircling the yard. Practical things. When the boy refused to speak for weeks, Tomas filled the silence with steady routine. This is how you gut a fish, he would say, guiding small hands carefully. This is how you split wood, let the axe fall straight, don't fight it. This is how you mend a fence so it holds through winter. The boy watched, listened, absorbed. On the first night the transformation happened fully, Tomas woke to splintering wood. The cabin groaned. Canvas tore. He rose from bed to find a wing vast, scaled, and trembling burst through the roof beams. Smoke coiled against the ceiling. Claws gouged deep furrows into the floorboards. In the center of the room crouched not a boy but a young dragon, no larger than a wagon yet far too large for the walls that confined him. Golden eyes were wide with terror. Tomas could have run. He did not. He stepped closer. The heat blistered his skin, the air shimmered. He placed his palm against burning scales. Easy now, he said, as though soothing a skittish mule. Easy. The dragon's breath came in ragged bursts. You're safe, Tomas continued. You're here. The great head lowered fractionally. The fire dimmed. Afterward, they rebuilt the roofs. Together, years layered themselves quietly. The boy learned language first in fragments, then in full thought. He learned the names of birds and constellations. He learned the difference between anger and fear, between sorrow and shame. When rage rose sharp and fast, as it sometimes did when passing merchants muttered about dragon hunts, Tomas would hand him a hammer. Build something, he'd say. When grief hollowed his chest at the memory of bronze scales and fallen wings, Tomas would sit beside him on the cabin step. You're allowed to miss what was lost, he'd murmur, but you're not required to become it. The lessons were simple, but they held. Aaron grew taller, stronger. His transformations came under control. Wings no longer shattered walls. Fire no longer leapt unbidden. He learned to bank flame within himself like a carefully tended hearth. He called Tomas father, the first time after a fever took him, and Tomas stayed awake 3 nights running with cool cloth and whispered reassurances. The word caught awkwardly in his throat. Tomas pretended not to notice. He simply squeezed the boy's shoulder once and said, "Aye." Peace might have lasted, but kingdoms do not forget power. Scouts ride quiet trails. Rumors travel faster than smoke. When word reached the capital that a dragon lived unchained beneath a human roof, the reaction was swift. King Valor demanded proof of dominance. Chains were forged in sorcery. Soldiers rode at dawn. They found Aaron splitting wood behind the cabin. He saw them before they reached the clearing. He could have fled. He could have burned the forest to cinders and vanished into mountain skis. Instead, he thought of Tomas mending fences inside. He dropped the axe. The first chain struck like lightning. Runes flared, biting deep into magic rather than flesh. He roared once, not in fury but in shock. Tomas burst from the cabin with rifle in hand, old but well kept. "Stop," he shouted. A dozen crossbows answered. Aaron met his father's gaze across the clearing. It was steady. It was pleading. "Don't." Tomas saw it. Slowly, he lowered the rifle. They dragged Aaron away in iron and blue flame. Tomas followed on foot. Now he stood in the marble hall of King Valor, watching the whip rise again. Each crack felt like it split something inside his own ribs. The dragon trembled harder, smoke coiled thick around him, a low vibration built in his chest, not quite a growl, not yet a roar. The marble fractured further beneath restrained force. "Strike until it submits," Lord Malric sneered. The whip fell, and stopped. Not by magic. By a human hand. Tomas Gray stepped forward without remembering crossing the distance. His fingers wrapped around the lash mid-arc. Barbs tore into his palm instantly. Blood welled bright and red against spell-threaded leather. The cord erupted in gasps. "You dare," Malric hissed, trying to wrench the whip free. Tomas did not release it. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He did not tremble. "He is not your spectacle," Tomas said quietly, voice carrying farther than it had any right to. "He is my son." Laughter shattered against marble columns. "A dragon," someone jeered, "your son." Tomas met the gaze of King Valor without flinching. "You chained him," he said. "You starved him, you beat him. And still he has not burned your palace to ash. Ask yourselves why." The laughter thinned. Aaron's shaking slowed. Golden eyes lifted, not wild, not wrathful. "Wounded." Tomas tightened his grip despite Barb's biting deeper. "He holds back," Tomas continued, steady as oak rooted deep in earth. "Not because of your chains, not because of your magic, because I asked him to." A sharp crack split the hall as marble gave way beneath Aaron's knees. "And if you strike him again," Tomas said softly, "I will ask him to stop holding back." Silence fell like a blade. Even King Valor did not breathe. Because in that moment, the truth settled over the court heavier than iron. The dragon had never been silent from weakness. He had been silent from love. When the court went still, Lord Malric sneered, though the expression strained at the edges. The court had felt it. That shift in the air. That weight pressing down upon silk and gold and arrogance alike. But Malric was a man who had built his reputation on certainty. Certainty that monsters must kneel. Certainty that power must answer to fear. Certainty that the world was cleanly divided between those who ruled and those who were ruled. He yanked the whip free from Tomas Gray's bleeding grip. Barbs tore skin as it slid loose, blood spattered bright against polished marble. Empty threats, Malric spat, though sweat shone unmistakably at his temples. A beast obeys fear, not affection. His voice rang too loud in the sudden hush. He raised the whip again. Across the fractured floor, Aaron knelt trembling, smoke pouring thicker now from between his clenched teeth. The runes carved into the black iron chains flickered erratically, their glow no longer steady blue but sputtering like guttering torches. The marble beneath his knees had given way entirely in places, cracks radiating outward in jagged veins. Tomas did not move aside. He stood between the Inquisitor and the dragon as though between storm and shore. His shoulders were squared, though blood ran freely down his wrist. His breathing was steady, not because he did not feel fear, but because he refused to let fear dictate him. The lash came down, and fire exploded. It did not ignite from the whip's spell thread. It erupted from Aaron's. The instant the barbed leather touched torn skin again, something ancient and restrained snapped, not into rage but into release. The chains shattered like brittle glass struck by a hammer. Iron fragments flew outward in ringing arcs, clattering against pillars and skidding across marble. The runes screamed, a high, keening sound as though language itself protested, before burning out in showers of blue sparks. Heat slammed into the court in a concussive wave. Aaron rose. Not as a boy. Not as something half-hidden. He rose to his full height, no longer pretending at smallness. Bone lengthened with a sound like distant thunder. Spine arched. Shoulders broadened, tearing what remained of fabric to ash. Silver tracings across skin ignited into blazing lines that raced outward, hardening into scales of molten gold and ember red. Wings burst from his back in a thunderclap of splintering air, vast, rag-edged pinions of ember and shadow that unfurled and scraped along the vaulted ceiling. Painted nights above shattered as plaster cracked and fell in powdering cascades. Chandeliers swung wildly, crystals chiming in terrified discord. Horns curved from his brow, sweeping back like a crown forged in flame. Molten light poured from between his teeth as his jaw parted, breath no longer smoke but the promise of inferno. The marble floor collapsed fully beneath clawed feet. Stone shattered under weight that belonged to mountains rather than palaces. The impact reverberated through columns and balconies alike, sending nobles scrambling backward in silks and jewels. Guards dropped spears that clattered uselessly to the ground. Some fled outright. Others stood paralyzed, unable to reconcile painted dragons on ceilings with the living, breathing truth now towering before them. The stained glass windows trembled violently, colors distorting as pressure built in the air. The dragon roared. It was not merely sound. It was memory. It was grief for forests burned and kin slain. It was fury inherited through bloodlines older than crowns. It was the cry of something vast that had chosen restraint until restraint was no longer possible. The roar shattered the remaining chains. It shattered every lingering illusion in the room. But the flames did not spread. They spiraled upward instead, coiling around the dragon's massive form like a cyclone of fire seeking escape. They licked the ceiling beams, seared murals black. And stopped short of silk banners. Stopped short of fleeing courtiers. Stopped short of the throne. Because Tomas Gray stood before him still. A single human figure amid ruin. Cloak singed at the edges. Hair whipped by heat. Blood dripping steadily from one hand. Enough. He did not shout. He did not plead. He did not command. He simply spoke. Certain. The word cut through the roar more cleanly than any blade. Aaron's blazing head turned. One enormous golden eye, slit pupil burning like a furnace core, lowered until it aligned with the man who had once shown him how to hold a hammer instead of a kingdom hostage. Smoke curled around Tomas. It wreathed him in heat that should have scorched flesh from bone. But it did not burn him. Years earlier, he had placed a steady hand against scales far hotter than these and taught fire to listen. "They hurt you," the dragon's voice thundered. It was layered, echoing, ancient, resonant with something that did not belong solely to the present. It carried undertones of wind through caverns and magma shifting deep beneath Earth's crust. "They hurt you," he repeated lower now. Tomas did not look away from that blazing eye. "I know," he replied gently, "and you endured." The word endured settled heavily between them. Not survived. Not suffered. Endured. A choice. The dragon's breath came in great, shuddering currents that rattled pillars. "I can end them," Aaron said. It was not a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. The court believed him. Every noble crouched behind overturned chairs believed him. Every guard clutching a fallen spear believed him. Even King Valor, rising slowly from his throne of carved oak and gilded lion heads, believed him. Tomas nodded once. "You could." Silence rippled outward from that admission. The dragon's wings flexed, casting vast shadows across shattered murals. Embers rained softly to the floor, hissing where they met cracked marble. "They hunted my kind," Aaron said, voice deepening with old pain. "They burned the forest they killed." His voice broke not with weakness, but with memory too large for sound. Tomas took one step forward. "Just one." "You are not what they made you survive," he said quietly. The words were old between them, spoken in cabins with broken roofs, whispered through nightmares, spoken again now before a kingdom. The dragon's eye flickered. Fire along his throat pulsed brighter, then dimmer, as though battling tide and gravity both. "They will never stop fearing me," Aaron said. "Perhaps," Tomas answered. The honesty of it struck harder than denial. "But fear is not the same as rule," he continued, "and it is not the same as you." The court watched in frozen disbelief as the colossal creature folded his wings slightly inward. "Not fully, but enough." The motion alone caused gusts of hot wind to sweep across the hall, sending loose parchment and shattered glass skittering. He made himself smaller. Not for chains, not for kings, but for a single human. King Valor descended the steps of his dais slowly. His robes trailed through dust and fragments of fallen ceiling art. He stopped several paces from Tomas, gaze lifting to meet the dragon. "What is it you want?" the king asked. His voice was thinner now. "Stripped of performance. Stripped of certainty." Tomas looked around the hall. He saw shattered marble where spectacle had once stood pristine. He saw nobles pressed against walls, jewels forgotten in their fists. He saw Lord Malrek sprawled on the floor, whip discarded, staring up at a creature he had believed controllable. He saw fear. Real fear. Not the theatrical fear used to justify cruelty, but the kind that humbled. "Nothing," Tomas said at last. The word fell heavy. "That," he added, "is the difference between you and us." King Valor's jaw tightened. "You expect to walk away." Tomas turned back to Aaron. "Come home, son." The word son echoed strangely in a hall built for declarations of lineage and bloodline purity. The dragon regarded the court one final time. Fire flickered in his throat, bright enough to reduce banners and thrones alike to cinders. In that moment, every soul present understood exactly what could have been. Understood how thin the line was between survival and annihilation. Understood that their continued existence hung not on chains or courage, but on mercy. The flames dimmed. Gradually, like a forge cooling. Wings contracted inward, emberlight fading to smoldering outlines. Scales softened, shrinking, flowing back into skin as vast form condensed with bone-popping cracks into something smaller. Horns receded. Claws shortened. Molten gold eyes dulled to human brightness, though depth remained. Where a dragon had stood now stood a young man, barefoot amid broken chains and fractured marble. Smoke clung faintly to him. He swayed once. Tomas stepped forward immediately, steadying him with his uninjured hand. Aaron looked down at the blood still trailing from his father's palm. Carefully, so carefully, he took that injured hand in both of his. His grip was gentle enough not to worsen the wound. They stood like that for a breath. Human and dragons. Father and son. Then, without awaiting permission, without bowing to throne or noble, they turned toward the great doors of the hall. Guards stood in their paths. Spears lay at their feet. None lifted them. None stepped forward. The massive doors loomed ahead, carved with scenes of conquest now cracked from the earlier roar. Tomas pushed one open. It groaned loudly on its hinges. Sunlight spilled inward, stark and honest. Together they walked from the palace. No guard moved to stop them. No noble dared speak. The doors closed behind them with a resonant thud that echoed through the broken hall. And long after the smoke thinned, long after the trembling in pillars ceased, long after King Valor resumed his throne in shaken silence, the court remained utterly, profoundly still. Not because of destruction, not because of terror, but because every person present had witnessed something far rarer than power unleashed. They had witnessed power restrained. They had seen a dragon brought to heel not by chains, not by fear, not by dominance, but by love. And that truth unsettled them more deeply than flame ever could. For a kingdom could forge stronger irons. It could raise taller walls. It could breed braver soldiers. But it did not know how to defend itself against a human father who had loved a dragon enough to teach him mercy.